I don't think either of them can turn on their audio.
Okay, I can just read theirs out then. So looks like if the U.S. adopts a no first use policy, it decreases the chance of nuclear war and other forms of biological and chemical warfare because other countries feel that the U.S. poses less of an aggressive threat. Okay. I think we can work on that impact, but it's good. Juliana and Suba, can one of you give explain your impact or no? All right, that's chill. So for miscalculation, Juliana and Suba, they said that with better conventional deterrence, the U.S. would have less chance of miscalculation because it's easier to miscalculate with nuclear weapons than with conventional military. Okay, so, oh yeah, I think I was talking about this last week. I think Hannah was the one that told me that like Russia almost started nuclear war because there were like birds that looked like that went on the radar and looked like a nuclear weapon. I don't know. You might want to fact check me on that one, but I can see it. That argument probably has some merits. All right, on Neg. Vishnu, why don't you explain your impact?
Okay. So my impact was that if the U.S. adopts a nuclear no first use policy, there are like two major impacts. First is that the U.S. would not be allowed to actually defend allies in case of harm with nuclear warfare, which is bad because if another country with nuclear ammunition and an arsenal attacks a U.S. ally without those benefits, then they need help, right? And we don't get that. And a second one impact is that like adding on to the first impact, millions of lives can be lost as a result of no action by the United States. And then second impact is like other states can actually gain greater hegemony than the U.S. due to a nuclear no first use policy because the U.S. is not much of an attacking force. So it could like override our overall dominance of the globe, I'd say, and like make United States sanctions and threats on other countries doing bad things like not as valuable or not as effective.
Cool. Is Miles here? I don't think so. Okay, cool. So for Miles, his was about nuclear proliferation, and his impact was that if more countries develop nuclear weapons, the chance of nuclear war will substantially increase. Yeah, so most of these impacts are about nuclear war, I guess. So cool. Vishnu, can you go to the next slide then? All right, cool. Or Sabina's probably, or like Hannah, one of you guys, you know more about this than me.
Wait, sorry, what? I couldn't hear.
You guys know more about like implicating arguments than me. Why don't you?
Okay, sure. Okay. So I don't know what the first part of this slide is. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, right. So like I think I have an easy way to point out mistakes in cases, and an easy way to improve your own cases is to look at what the importance of specific pieces of evidence are. So a lot of things will be like discussing like percentages, or they'll be discussing like large numbers without any explanation of context for what those numbers are. So for example, especially with economic impacts, if someone is just like $20 million is lost or something, we don't know what that means, because what if they're talking about like government spending? The government spends trillions of dollars every year. $20 million is like $2 to them, right? So you need a contextualization of arguments, and I think it's really easy to point out those mistakes, because if there's no context, then we don't understand why it's important. And it makes it a lot more convincing for your judge when you're doing weighing. If you're like, well, we don't even know what kind of like implication this is going to have in the real world, because we just are given some numbers. But if you in your own case are questioning those things, then you can make your case a lot stronger by giving context. For example, like having a baseline in your evidence that says like it's going to increase or decrease comparatively with or without something there. And you also want to implicate, like, it goes in hand with having a terminalization of your impact. So you can't just say like there's a percent increase or decrease in GDP growth. You have to impact the GDP growth to something else. And usually like the simplest thing to impact to is poverty. So I think like the importance of implicating what that means comes also later in the round, especially in rebuttal. Implications are important because you explain like how it makes sense that you would care about this issue. So it kind of just takes the step of having an impact further when you say, okay, like 80 million people go into poverty. The implication is that it's not just going to be in like maybe your argument is about like the globe. So you say 80 million people go into poverty in the globe. The implication is that it's a lot harder for them to get out of poverty because right now we're already in like a global recession, and there's probably not infrastructure in most countries right now to like increase social mobility. So the poverty is going to be uniquely worse now than any time in like the past. And then the contextualization of why your impact is more severe just provides like more certainty in why your judge wants to avoid having it happen. And in your case, the way your implications can work is like it can even just be small things, like the way you use transitions to argue like this is really critical because there's not there's not an alternative, or this is irreversible. The way you use small transitions in your case can also improve the way that you like blow it up later in rounds. So in summary, you can go off of like, in case we tell you it's irreversible, their impact like isn't irreversible. And like in context of some of these cases, I think the easiest way to give like clean implications is to make sure that all of your evidence kind of lines up together. So when you're writing like the warrant of something, it's really simple to be like, this is why X thing happens. And the implication is that it's going to lead to my next card. And then you just keep doing that, and it makes your link chains like a lot smoother. So you kind of just insert a little bit of a transition that says, this is really important because it directly connects to XYZ.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that was like a better explanation than what I could have given. Cool. So did everybody understand that? Because if possible, anybody that can, I want you guys to give me an implication for your impacts, just to show that you're understanding what Sabine's saying, because it is pretty important. Like, I'm sorry, Vishnu, but you're the only one that has a mic. So Vishnu, why don't you try to implicate your impact for us?
Okay. So my impact is basically the United States allies and their civilians can be harmed by opposing countries due to U.S. inaction. And this implicates that millions of lives will be lost, and it will be a lot worse than if we just didn't implement the policy in the first place.
Or Sabine, why don't you guys give feedback for that. I don't really like.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. I think that has like definitely the basic idea of what an implication is. It can be super simple, like you can literally just be saying the implication is that you're better off in the AF world or the neg world. If you've really, really well terminalized your impact in a case, then your implication can really be as simple as that. I think Vishnu did a good job of explaining how like his implication is that it has to pertain to life. So I think a mistake people make is they can't find evidence for a specific like number of like deaths that are going to happen in, especially with neg cases. I think it's usually hard because AF has the potential to say like we want to make a change, so they can just point at something that is already happening and find evidence for that, but neg has to go out and find hypothetical scenarios that are usually a lot harder to provide concrete evidence for. So I think that it's totally fine to have an implicated impact in terms of like how many lives are lost. And you can really just be weighing like your clarity of link at that point. You can be like, look, it's a really clear way in which this scenario plays out. It's very clear that like X is going to lead to Y, and the implication of Y is super obvious. Like if war breaks out, then obviously people are going to die. And I think the way that implications work in that sense, that it's really intuitive, makes them just as convincing as having like a piece of evidence that just straight up says like 70 people die or something like that. So I think that's a pretty good like way to implicate your argument, is just to go like the implication is this is what kind of effect it has on life or quality of life, and then to compare that to what happens in your opponent's like side. It makes it really simple for judges.
Thank you.
All right, cool. Why don't you just go into the next slide so we can kind of finish it up. Yeah, all right. So frontlining. This one is one of the most important things, I feel like, especially when you have like a case that you always know what the other person is going to say against it. Frontlining is when you respond to arguments made by your opponents in your case. If like, let's say you're talking about like why Amazon is the best company. A lot of people, especially a lot of Democrats, talk about how Amazon did not pay any income tax in 2018, I think. So if you know that all of these people are going to say this every single time, whenever you're trying to say that Amazon is the best company, I don't know, in the world, you're always going to want to address that in your case. Like, despite not paying any income tax in 2018, Amazon only was able to not pay any income tax because they leveraged free cash flow to be able to invest in stock buybacks and creating more jobs in other countries as well as in the United States. So like, it's responding to an argument that you know your opponents are going to say within your case. And I mean, you can do it outside, like Sabine was talking about, in blocks, in your like in second rebuttal or first summary, but you can also do it in case. And they gave an example here, but that was from BRI. So we can just work with that one. I can try to think of like all right, here's an example. All right, so like this is my favorite scene from Iron Man. Basically, Iron Man goes in and the Senate Committee for like for Intelligence is holding a hearing because they want the Iron Man suit. So then Iron Man, or like Tony Stark, comes in and they confront him with the facts, and his buddy Rhodes is like, well, within a subsection of his report, he's like, Iron Man poses a potential danger to the United States. So then Tony Stark comes up with this frontline, and he's like, well, the benefits outweigh the harms. And so even though I'm causing some sort of harm to people because I don't work within the existing like army, I still like stopped a world war and everything like that. So at the end of the day, I'm still like a better option than putting me within the US government. Like, those are the type of things that you want to be including in your case so you don't get blindsided, or so you don't have to respond to as many things as like you probably will have to. Cool. Hannah or Sabine, do you guys want to add to that?
Sure. I think like a mistake that people tend to make when they like start prepping is they get really concerned with like having as many responses as possible to as many arguments as possible. But it's really not important to have like a 700-page block file or something absolutely wild. What is definitely way more important is having front lines prepared. So I think that the more you just know your own arguments, the more likely you are to win the round, because at the end of the day, you're never going to know your opponent's case better than they know their case, unless you literally wrote it and they just like got it from some random place. You're always going to know your case better, so why not just give yourself the extra advantage of having thought of all of the potential responses, of having done practice rounds and hearing other people's responses, and then preparing like all of the like potential, or preparing front lines for all of those. And I think it also is just a lot more efficient in general, because if you're just spending like, you could spend like 8 hours a day writing blocks to as many arguments you could hear about on a topic, and you would still end up with like not responses to everything, right? But I think that if you had spent all that time like preparing front lines, then you would probably have some kind of way to get around any argument that someone could read against your case, because there's pretty much an infinite number of like arguments on a topic in general, but it's really unlikely that you're going to hear like a ton of responses, different responses to like one of your contentions, because usually people will just try and find the easiest way to respond. And by the time they like have to get to making a more difficult or less intuitive response, you'll have already won the round, because you'll have responded to like their first response, and it will be too late for them in final focus to come up and like say something random. So I think front lines are just really efficient. If you know your own case and you know that you can win with the impact you have, then writing front lines is basically all that you need to do on top of having your case to really win the round.
Why don't we just like here? I'm sorry, Vishnu, man, but like nobody else has their mics on, so I'll just keep using like yours as an example. If we go to Vishnu's contention, his contention is on the neg, and he's saying that we're risking U.S. hegemony or like U.S. dominance, because if we sign a no first use policy, it assumes that the U.S. is choosing peace over geopolitical dominance. So, like, what do you guys think are some rebuttals that may be offered up? Like, that's a bad way to say it. What do you think are some like common responses to that? If you are on the app and you hear him say that, and you're just like so enraged because it's like the worst argument ever, what are you like about to say? And Vishnu, you can also like, because as Sabine said, you know your argument better than anybody. So you guys can type in the chat, Vishnu, what do you think are some arguments against that?
Well, I think for one, like one argument might be like the world prioritizes peace over global geopolitical dominance already. So, prioritizing the United States prioritizing peace would just be a symbol to other countries that the United States is doing well. And I think basically de-escalation, because it's like the exact same thing except it has a positive impact. So de-escalation could be a turn.
Okay, so they're going to say that the world prefers peace. That's their response. So then what would you say to that? Because like, I mean, I know a lot of countries that don't prefer peace, or they like to engage in proxy wars. So what would you say against that the world prefers peace?
Well, and you can say some countries are like on the brink of, like, for example, some U.S. allies are being pressurized by other countries. Like, for example, China is like currently pressurizing like Taiwan among other allies, like trying to essentially make it into like a Hong Kong. So I guess if the United States prioritizes peace, it allows other countries to actually expand. Since if the U.S. is peaceful, it won't pose a threat.
Sorry, I should have clarified. If you were saying that the United States is showing weakness by passing a no first use policy, and then I come up there and I say that actually the world prefers peace, what would you say against that? What would you say in response to me saying that? Because your position is that the United States would show weakness. So what would you say, like, when I say that the world prefers peace?
Well, basically, if you say the world prefers peace, I'd probably say there's some countries that aren't, like, I don't know, like, following these, like, peaceful vibes too. And these countries, despite global peace being more important, the United States becoming peaceful actually increases chaos in other regions of the world, which overall leads to a decrease in peace across the globe. So if we want to maximize peace, we have to trade off a bit of peace in the U.S.
I think you have the right idea, but maybe just think like a little bigger. Because if your opponents are saying that the world prefers peace, your first instinct should be to try to prove that the world actually prefers war. And so then you could go, like, say the US's major adversaries are like trying to take over parts of the Middle East and like geopolitical dominance. They're like Belt and Road Initiative. China is spending over $1 trillion trying to outsell the United States for infrastructure parts. And so now they're taking up countries in Asia that used to be paying the United States a lot of money, and now they're paying China a lot of money. So, I mean, I think that that it's like the right idea to show that these countries internally are like hurting their citizens. But I also think that externally, your first instinct should be to add somewhere in your case that, and I can get, Jacqueline, I'll get to yours in a second, but maybe add a front line that talks a little bit about how like Russia will stop at nothing to try and dominate the globe. Like cite some like professor that's talking about that. And then like Jacqueline, the US can still maintain geopolitical dominance through conventional weapons. Okay, if that's your response, then then your first instinct there should be to show that you can only maintain geopolitical dominance through nuclear weapons. So then maybe a front line there would be like conventional weapons always lose to nuclear weapons, and everybody knows that. So then they'll just nuke a place if the US only uses conventional weapons. So, you know, you can also do that. Like those are things that you can add into your case. So your opponents, when they're trying to respond, you already have the front, like the judge already has taken notes. They already have your impression of that argument in their minds. So once they hear your opponent's response, you're already going to be thinking about what you said and saying like, and thinking that your opponents are being like basically ignorant if they read that right after you read something that proves that they're not right about that. Or it forces your opponents to take more time, respond to what you gave in your case, and then give their response. Is there any more? Let me check the presentation. Yeah, that's the last slide. All right, cool. Hannah, Sabine, unless you guys want to like add anything, just make sure you guys finish cases or contentions by next week. It's really important that you guys finish them by next week because we want to get you guys probably like, I mean, I can't speak for the other coaches, but I think it would be pretty cool if you guys were like performing better than like sophomores or juniors freshman year. And I think that the way that you guys can get to that level is by like starting earlier. So I feel like I don't know how much you guys have to do, but I don't have that much to do. So if you guys can just take like an hour or 2 hours, just write out your contention now that you have a basic outline, and maybe add some things in if you want. Just include it in the document because we want you guys all to have access to everything that you're doing. And then yeah, that's basically it unless you guys have like questions. Oh, or if you guys want to see the cool lamp again, because I don't mind showing it.